welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author is Randy Hain, author of two books, Journey to Heaven, published by Emmaus Road, and The Catholic Briefcase, published by Liguori Publications, both available through our EWTN religious catalog, by the way. Hey, Randy, great to meet in person.
Nice to meet you, Doug.
We've actually had, some business dealings that have had to do with EWTN that didn't relate directly to your being a convert author. In fact, it would relate to maybe the Catholic Briefcase concept in your job and stuff. So you've got two books, Journey to Heaven, The Roadmap for Catholic Men. Now, the first one earlier was The Catholic Briefcase, Tools for Integrating Faith and Work. So let's talk about your newest one, Journey to Heaven, Roadmap for Catholic Men. Now, was this a step out for you? I know you've got Pat Madrid, who did the introduction. I mean, you start off with something that kind of is more or less the kind of, gee, I'm a Catholic guy now, and how do I bring my faith into, and so I'm integrating work, I understand that. So that's kind of a specific area, and you're a recruiter, right, or an executive recruiter. Right?
One of my professions.
One of your multiple tasks, right? You're a Renaissance man, in doing that. So someone could see that, but you stepped out to something that's broader. You know, we've got, Danny Abramowitz and Crossing the Gold, and you've got others out there. In fact, I think you've got Father Larry Richards, that very quiet, soft-spoken priest who's doing a radio show for us, who starts off, we have two choices: we can become saints or we go to hell. That's what I always liked about Father. He's got to learn to speak his mind a little bit better. But how did you move out of that kind of just business into men in general, Catholic men?
Well, that's actually my fifth book, and over the course of the books I've written, I've always tried to write about real life, what's going on in my life. So when I first came into the church, one of the first things that I faced was how to integrate faith into all areas of my life, though that book was the result.
So this was actually your fourth book?
That was my first book.
This was your first book?
Right.
And in between you've written other books?
I have.
Catholic-related books?
Along the way, Lessons for an Authentic Journey of Faith, and something more, The Professional's Pursuit of a Meaningful Life. And my fourth book was a book about job search strategy.
Okay.
This was the fifth. But to your point...
Can you send me the fourth book? I'm interested in that. Okay.
I'll leave a dozen.
Okay, thank you.
But Journey to Heaven was interesting because in my travels around the country, I kept encountering Catholic men, and we would just have some of the most robust conversations. And I recognized that, I think we all know that men are in trouble. Men are struggling right now. And
more so than women, do you think?
Absolutely. I think it's the feminization of our culture. I think men are being emasculated in the media.
You talk about that, right?
There are a lot of issues. But for myself, and I always try to write from the perspective of what am I going through as a Catholic and would others relate to it. So when I wrote this book, it was to some degree cathartic. I wanted to write about my experiences. And as you probably saw from the conclusion, I wanted to leave a legacy to my own sons.
Right. You have that at the end where you kind of go through that with, you have two sons, right?
Two boys.
And one of your children is a special needs child, right?
Yes, my oldest son.
Okay. Now, in the foreword, you've got the one and only Pat Madrid here to write, and he says that life is analogous to freshly poured cement that is still wet and malleable. You still have time to discard bad habits and acquire good ones, and by God's grace, form your character for the good. So is this in a lot of cases a call to maybe people who are starting this journey as well, who still have that time? I guess we always have time to realize that we can always begin again, but certainly the younger you start, the easier it is in a lot of ways. Are you seeing as well more younger people in the business industry these days, maybe than before, come to the conclusion that there's something missing, that there's something else that must be there?
Absolutely. A couple of things, a couple of aspects to what you said. I think younger men today are especially lost, and they're feeling overwhelmed. They lead very busy lives. They're trying to be husbands and fathers, and they're trying to do their business, and they don't quite understand how to make it all work. And then you try to put faith in the mix, and they just shut down. They don't know where to go with that. So when you talk about let's be more active in our Catholic faith, they feel like it's just one more thing we can't do. Well, one of the things that the book tries to do is to make living out our faith very practical. That's why it shows these great Catholic men to be interviewed in the book to give you an example to follow.
And that's really the premise of the book, right?
Absolutely. How do I practically live it out? Now, older men, I would say probably 30 to 55, that's the group that seems to be looking for a more meaningful life. They recognize that chasing the dollar and the bigger house and the lake house and the 3 cars in the garage isn't really it, and I'm missing something. To some degree, that was my own case. When I turned 40, I recognized that I had everything that the world said was success.
You just had a midlife crisis, that's it.
Absolutely.
You just filled it up with something else.
But for me, I needed faith, and I didn't recognize it until I got to a place where I was ready for it. And I see a lot of men struggling with both sides of that.
Why do you think men aren't always ready for it?
we mature later than women. And my wife would testify to that if she was here. But I think men, we don't share necessarily what's on our hearts and minds. It's difficult for us to open up. So again, I wanted to write something that would give them access to real Catholic men going through the same problems and some candid advice, obviously through the filter of our Catholic faith. So the book is extremely faithful to the magisterium, but it gives you just practical ways to live it out.
Well, again, in the forward, Pat says that men are physiologically, mentally, and emotionally external and projecting. That's why we like contact sports. Women are physiologically and emotionally internally receptive. And that's where the whole complementarity comes out. But in today's modern society, that's not looked at as being the way things really are.
That's true. And I think men today there's this interesting guilt syndrome where men feel like they have to also do the roles that maybe their wives are playing, and there's a lot of morphing and mixing going on. And I'm not here to say that there aren't things that we can not do better at home. We can. My wife and I are a couple and a pair, and we do things together. We're partners. But I do think that men are confused about their roles, and they're not embracing their vocations as husbands and fathers. Our mission is to get our families to heaven. And I think that we're forgetting that. We're focused way too much on things that don't matter.
And also, I think, and some of the people, just Peter Herbeck, Tom Peterson from Catholics Come Home is in here, some other names, Kevin Lowry, Dan Burke from the Register, of course, Brian Caulfield is associated with the Knights of Columbus, Chris Stefanak, and also Matt Swain from our radio show, and there's Bishop Michael Sheridan. So just some of the people who you interviewed, and you thanked them for doing the ability to do that. Also, I wonder with what men are dealing with as well is you kind of had a situation where you had the wife at home and the men working, and there was this clear division, how inappropriate it might have been, but a sort of division of work, though women obviously never stopped working. But then you have the wife who's now got to go out, or is going out in the double income world, because we have to work in order to live this lifestyle
to buy things we don't need.
Right, to have it to be that way, and go out and do that. And then, so that takes away from that. Then the man, so now you have two people basically, as the guy hopefully is a little more sensitive than maybe some of our parents might have been, as that happened, to realize I do have to step in and do that. It is a team effort for us working together, but you end up with two stressed out people now.
Right.
Instead of even just one at times.
And two things suffer in that regard. Right. It's the marriage and it's the children. The marriage suffers, but also the children suffer because they're not getting the nurturing and the time they need with their parents.
Well, you say, I felt drawn to this topic because I am greatly troubled by the world in which we live. You go on to say, about men understanding their faith, their God-given responsibilities are being led astray by the false idols of our modern culture. Men in general are faced with significant challenges. The feminization, you said, of masculinity is well documented and a growing trend. And that leads to some degree that the head of the family role is under attack. And then you tie directly into pornography. You see those connected?
I do. I think men are looking in all the wrong places for answers instead of to our faith. And one of the places is pornography. I devoted an entire section in the back of the book to an interview with Patrick Truman, who runs Morality for Media. And what I learned in that interview was shocking. I mean, I think it's close to 70% of men polled confidentially say that they are online looking at pornography. A shocking number of women are as well. But they're looking for answers that can only be found through faith in God and the church. So they're looking at all the wrong places. So I do think that pornography is an issue. The book is not all about that, but that is certainly a piece of it. There are a lot of factors that get between us and Christ and His church.
Well, it seems to me in some ways the whole pornographic thing is also, besides the ease and access to it and those kinds of things, is partially an idea that people think there's a party going on someplace that they're missing out on, which they see on TV, they think. And the other part is that in a relationship, it's 100%, as you say here. I came out of Marriage Encounter, so we get that idea, but it's always being self-donating, as St. John Paul II talked about. It's giving when one doesn't feel like giving. It's that really, and so that's difficult. You have to work through. That's how marriages get stronger and last. But the world we live in today, as soon as we feel pain, our thought is to run away. How do I get away? And if I don't have to deal with you to have my needs satisfied, I can go on a computer some way and have my needs satisfied, well, that makes my life easier. It also tends to put strains on the relationship because the need for the intimacy between the couple starts to go away.
Absolutely. Now, I think if you look at the way our kids are being raised today, they're being told that you can have instant access to gratification and entertainment all day long. You can have what you want. You can have it all now. It's your oyster. Go take it. We were raised in a generation where hard work. You work your way up. You earn what you get.
And put some away for the future. You're thinking about the next stage of things.
And there's a huge dichotomy between our generation and this generation. And I think that the families today are really struggling because a lot of the millennial dads are starting to get older, and they're looking for that instant gratification. You know what? Marriage is hard work. Raising kids is hard work. It's not always going to be a Sunday with a cherry on top.
Well, do you think sometimes I think that the baby boomers just have never wanted to grow up, or they still want it to be 1968 or something?
You know, a lot of the baby boomers I've interviewed for the book, I'm not sure if that's always their take. Right. I think that there's a lot of concern about maybe they didn't necessarily do the job they needed to do with their children. Because a lot of what we're seeing today in the younger men, family men, is they didn't really get it from their parents. So I think there's a lot of guilt about that. So
sometimes that's why they work on the grandkids.
Exactly.
Which we encourage, because it's a great way to reclaim your family for the faith, really.
Exactly.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, it just strikes me that sometimes also you end up with if you're dealing with people who don't believe in, let's say, an afterlife, well, somehow the only way to stay eternal is to stay eternally young and be eternally youthful and act like death really isn't something that's coming your way. Now, you say Journey to Heaven is divided into 3 sections: faith, family, work, and the public square. And you talk about one of these you got right up front, and that's the one, also in some ways as pride comes in. Talk about marriage, fatherhood, integrating faith, etc. And you've got those appendices that you talked about, one with pornography, one on having to do with the religious life and vocation, and resources for men. But one of the things I thought too was interesting in the foreword that Pat Madrid said, the world says whatever it is, there's an app for that. And is that fitting into that same idea, though, that we want instantaneous answers?
Right.
We may see it's a problem. I'm willing to deal with the problem, but I need a 5-point plan. I need something I can do in 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day. I read your book. You're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning writing books and get up early so you can pray and all those things. And I read that and then I roll over. Is there an easy way?
There is no easy way. Okay. And I think what Patrick's referring to there, and he and I chatted about the foreword that he wrote, is there's a sense now that we can download that app and fix every problem, to your point. But what this book is meant to be is really more of a divinely inspired app that is, it's not an app in the true sense of the word. It's really meant to be a process. It's meant to be something that's going to challenge you. If you read this book and don't feel challenged, then I'm not quite sure where you're coming from, because it really will challenge you. But the idea is to make you think differently, give you examples to follow. And I'm sure you picked up on this, Doug, in the book. This is not a heavy theological work. I read with great respect a lot of the theological works that are out there related to men, but I wanted to write it from the layperson's perspective. I'm out there just like you guys, doing the same thing, and struggling with the same things. And that's where men will find it to be very helpful and practical.
Now, one of the things you say, obstacles between Catholic men and Christ and actions to overcome them, you go through them, and one, lack of courage. What is the lack of courage? What is that? Where does that come from, and what do you mean?
I mean that men need to not be afraid to embrace their responsibilities. I think there's a fear factor out there that's pretty significant, and men have to be courageous. You know, being a good husband and father today is actually a courageous act, if you think about it. I mean, how many good men are lifted up as role models on sitcoms today? You know, right now, Homer Simpson is the model instead of St. Joseph. So lifting up men.
At least he's still married these days.
That's true. That's true. So I think men need to embrace courage. You know, because everything that I'm asking you to think about in the book, and all the guys who are interviewing the book, are asking you to just think about a more courageous approach to your manhood.
Right. And one of the quotes here that struck me, talk about the identity gap is being filled with lies from a culture that encourages men to define themselves in all the wrong ways. What is the identity gap in your mind?
Well, I think that so many times, all of us, men, women, we look to social media, we look to TV, we look in the wrong places, we look at situation common, as we just mentioned, and they're watching these characters. And if we're not careful, these characters can suddenly become real life. Well, you know what? So-and-so did it on TV. Maybe I should do that too. You see all of these different shows.
Or at least it becomes somewhat more acceptable as you're exposed to it. Right?
Exactly. So we start to identify with these characters, and that's the gap I'm referring to. We become like those characters because that's all we know. You know, and so instead of looking to more wholesome shows, EWTNs for one, but as you look at role models, we're looking in the wrong places, and we're identifying with that, and we're becoming people that we're not meant to be.
Now, just before we go, and we want to talk a little bit about the Catholic Briefcase at the end. Now, you're a convert. You came into the church, and you talk about the fact that women outnumber men in the Catholic Church every Sunday by 25%. Now, was that a surprise to you? I mean, when you went to church at a Catholic church versus where you had been before, was that different than what you saw? Did you see more men?
You know, it was. I grew up in the Baptist church as a young man. Then I had no faith for 23 years. But I do remember from my Protestant days, there were a lot of families, and men were just as dominant as women. But I see now in the Catholic Church, and I did a lot of research on this, women do outnumber men. Men are not going to church. Wives are going without their husbands. Men are just not engaging in their faith. And one of the things that I want to stress, Doug, is the men I've interviewed and talked to about this book, they feel to some degree beaten down, and a lot of them have given up. They feel like, you know what, I've got so much on my plate, and you're asking me to think about being more Catholic. I just can't fit that in. Again, the book is meant to help them with that. But men are giving up, and that's why we have such a man crisis. Men are just not engaging and trying anymore.
Well, a couple of things, and you have questions for reflection as you go through each of the particular chapters, and you even mentioned a little bit about there's a barrier around the heart formed at a young age, my personal experience. And one of the questions were reflections in the chapter, Let It Go, says, as I ponder the lessons of this chapter, do I recognize any disordered attachments in my life? I guess the question would be for many people today is identifying what's disordered.
Well, you mentioned pornography. That's certainly an example of a disordered attachment. I am fixated on an idea of beauty that is not real versus the woman God gave me in marriage. A great example. I think others are, I'm so focused on my career as a man.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Something that maybe somebody would not recognize as being that, right?
Well, I'm chasing the bigger house, and I'm working really hard, and I'm not spending time with my family, so I can make more money to buy the bigger house and the boat. And at the end of the day, you're going to lose your family and have these things you can't take with you. A great example of a disordered attachment. You mentioned the two-income households. Really taking a healthy look at, is one income enough? And can we live on one income? And what does that mean for our family? Instead of, okay, we've got to keep up with the Joneses, so let's go buy more things. And that's really what disordered means.
Right, exactly. And that's Journey to Heaven, a roadmap for Catholic men. I wanted to touch base on the Catholic Briefcase, Tools for Integrating Faith and Work. And I would say that in reading this book, after I had read the other book, that I saw some of the sense of some of the similar concepts and things that you bring forward in the other book. Now, you say in the foreword here, actually it was somebody else who actually wrote the foreword, right? But he mentions, as it turns out, being Catholic is as much a noun as a verb. What does that mean?
I think Catholic has to be an action word. I am Catholic in the workplace. And what he was referring to is, so many of us just say, I'm Catholic, and it's an identification word. That's what you call me, but we don't live it. And this book is meant to help you live it, specifically in the workplace.
And you say in this that much of the writing in this book reflects real-life situations of Catholics in the workplace whom I have encountered over the last few years. And not surprisingly, is the workplace that our faith is most commonly called into question. And I would say this book was written several years ago. I would think it's gotten worse.
It has. The PC police are everywhere. It's very difficult to bring God into the workplace. But one of the things that I'll tell you, I speak to groups all over the country about faith at work issues, and one of the things that's a common misconception is that faith at work has to be a Bible study in the lunchroom or walking through the office with a crucifix and a processional, when really faith at work can be being the light of Christ to others. It's making decisions through the filter of our faith. So, really working on ourselves and being the light of Christ to others is an incredible way to be Catholic at work.
And being willing to stand up, the courage, kind of talking about the others, when somebody says something that you disagree with, or in many cases, being willing to stand up when somebody else is courageous.
Yes.
Even though the majority of the people don't agree with that person, or at least on the surface don't agree. Because my feeling is that many people stand there and don't agree at all with some of these things that are going on, but they don't want to get in trouble. They want to see to be different. They want to fit in, and so nobody wants to say what they really think.
And our silence signals acceptance.
Right, right, exactly. And you talk about here authenticity, integrity, empathy, love, and other characteristics of Christianity are not valued in my company. This is a person talking. In fact, they're discouraged. And that's the thing. I mean, you run into situations. Here's a Hobby Lobby, the case. You know, obviously EWTN involved with the same HHS from a nonprofit versus a profit, but a family company that has these morality and that takes this stand, and that becomes challenged, and that becomes a negative, and that's seen as a negative.
But isn't it interesting, you look at what the social media had to say about that, but then you look at sort of the boots on the ground issue. People flock to their stores to support them. Same thing with Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A, right.
Exactly. They had record sales.
And they're still not open on Sundays, which is really a statement.
And they never will be.
You know, say here in finding strength in surrender, always the classic Catholic Christ contradiction, you know. Sign of contradiction. Finding strength in surrender says, in my professional life I encounter dozens of people each month who are going through career transition, especially in this difficult economy, and you talk about this. When you're dealing with people like that, how much of those career transitions, is it like a divorce, a marriage, you know, and it's the kind of thing that sometimes they talk about divorce or some of the moving is akin to death in the sense of that. So how do people, are there people more in transition than there used to be? I mean, people are moving from company to company. Even with that relationships, parts of the country, the family, the extended family isn't there. I'm moving away for a job. I moved from Long Island to come to Alabama. Does that put a lot of stress on the family? Absolutely.
There is a lot of emotional stress involved with that. But one of the points about that I would make is, like with any big decision, especially career transition, you know, being Catholic at work, whatever, we often make our decisions, we do what we think we should do, and then we ask God to validate our decision. So what I'm really talking about there is, how do we make sure that we're living out our faith at all times, and especially when we're going through adversity, be obedient and surrender. Don't put our will and our pride before what God's will is in our lives. And I think that so many of us forget, especially when we're in challenging times like that, to turn to Him first.
Have you ever dealt with someone who's looking to make some sort of transition, moving from money to meaning, or one of those other phrases, who you thought, you know what, I'm not sure you're really ready to make this move, or that you're really, like you said, are you listening to yourself or you're listening to God? Whose timing are you basing this on?
I have met people like that, and I coach a number of people today, and I can tell you typically that the tipping point is probably 40 years or older. I do meet people, especially millennials today, who really do have a sincere desire to change the world. They want to live the life with meaning. But I start with a series of challenging questions. I just ask people to confront themselves. Self-awareness is a real issue. I think Father mentioned that earlier. People don't know themselves. So I try to ask the difficult questions to get them to face who they are. And they may have real responsibilities they're running away from to go save the world. But sometimes we have to save the family, and we have to do the right things at home. Right. So I do challenge people to think through that. It's not for everybody, but at some point we do have to recognize that just having all the trappings of success is not going to be enough.
Do you think sometimes, you say in chapter 3, Time to Think, we are addicted to background noise and connecting with others through our computers and our smartphones? I mean, I'm as guilty of that, and probably more guilty than most. But that whole idea, but the expectation in the world has changed. It used to be, you know, somebody could say, it's in the mail. Okay, you know, somebody would write somebody or make a phone call and expect to get. Now, you get an email or a text, and if you don't respond right away, you'll get another one saying, did you get my message?
Exactly.
And so there's an expectation now that you're always on call and you're always responding, or you should be, and if you're not, there's something wrong.
There's a huge issue with that. Busyness is pervasive in our culture. I do think that men and women, anyone who's got this issue, needs to start to designate certain times of the day, sort of technology-free zones, where they just turn it off. And I will tell you, one of the biggest contributors to the problem you just said, is we're allowing that to be done to us. I have a rule at my house: when it's dinner time, it's dinner time. Turn it off. Turn off the technology.
Right, right.
Now, if there's an email that comes in, it can wait.
Right,
okay.
right.
So, but if I have the expectation and I created in my own mind that I have to respond, well, that's on me. It's not really on the person who sent the email. So, just remembering that we control our calendars don't control us. Another thing about calendars is I put my prayer life on my calendar. I build my spiritual life, my prayer life first, and then I put my business endeavors after that. So my prayer life is on my calendar, because if it's not scheduled, it won't happen.
Right, especially for men.
Exactly, exactly.
Right, right. Good point. Actually, I was hoping you'd bring one of these Catholic Briefcase with you so I could just start using all it and pull all the resources, but they're in the book. You have to read the book. And the other book is Journey to Heaven, a Roadmap for Catholic Men, both by Randy Hain, both worth checking out. Thank you so much. Give us a lot to think about, especially for men out there trying to lead a Catholic Christian life and to lead their family. Because as you said earlier, one of the things that always struck me years ago, to just be a good family man was enough. It doesn't seem to be, but it should be. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much, Randy Hain, author of Journey to Heaven, Emmaus Road published, and The Catholic Briefcase, published by Liguori Publications, both available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. That's www.ewtnrc.com. Best way to check this book out, and check us out next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark. Thanks for joining us.